Hello, welcome back to our channel. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to choose a story for storytelling and dramatization while teaching young learners. Now, there are three possibilities for what we can do with a story. We can read it, we can tell it, or we can create it. Now, story reading, storytelling, and story creating all have good points and not so good points. First, let's begin with story reading. Just a quick note before I start. If you'd like to use a Turkish book, I don't see why you should, but if you have a burning desire to use a Turkish book, like this one, I suggest you cover the Turkish lines like this and read it as, or tell it as, an English story, because it's not natural to use a Turkish book and read it in English or tell it in English. If you want to use the visuals in the book, students should not see what is written in Turkish. So you can say, okay, we're going to read a story, and the name of the story is Home Monsters. Okay. Now, what are some good points about reading a story? As a teacher, you don't need to learn the story by heart because you have the book. You can refer to the book whenever you need. And you don't need to worry about making English mistakes because the lines are there and you're just reading them. If you read the story, the children will always hear the same text, and this will help them to predict what is to come. The lines won't change. And it demonstrates that books are a source of interesting ideas, a source of fun. So children seeing you reading a book may find it encouraging, motivating. And perhaps when you're done with the book, children can borrow it and reread it at home. And pictures in the book, the visuals, the illustrations in the book are helpful. You don't need to prepare extra visuals to clarify the meaning. You can always show the pictures of the book and read the story. But there are some not so good points about reading a story. Now, when you have a written text, you usually have, or we usually have, a tendency to go a bit too fast, read a bit too quickly. Now, because written texts are precise, economical, and non-repetitive, they are difficult to understand for young children. And when you're reading from a book, you need to stand in front of the classroom so that everyone can see what you're reading and what you're showing. If you want to walk around the classroom, your students will lose your sight and they may panic. They may keep saying, I can't see it, I can't see the picture, I can't see the book. And it is always to bury oneself in the book and forget the listeners when you're reading. And when you're reading a book, there are two possible angles. One is holding the book like this and trying to read from upside down like this, which is not very practical. Or holding the book like this in one hand so that you can use the other to make some gestures and movements, whatever, and then read from this angle. it is not very practical either. Let's try. "Please, Miss Miller, can I sharpen my pencil?" said Sarah. See how it keeps you occupied, so your eyes are focused on the text and your hand is full. It's occupied, so you cannot do anything else. Now let's move on to storytelling. The good points about storytelling is when children see you tell a story, it makes it very personal. They see that the story is not coming out of a book, but it's coming out of your mouth. It's coming from your heart. So it becomes more motivating. Children these days, unfortunately, rarely hear someone tell a story. And this can have a very powerful effect on them. And it is often easier to understand a story being told than one which is being read aloud, because speech is going to be more natural. You will pause every now and then, trying to remember the next line coming, or you may repeat yourself, or you may begin a sentence and fail to finish it. So restart the sentence, which are all natural, which are all part of a natural speech act. When you tell a story, because you can see everyone, you can see their faces, you can see their bodies, you can check whether they are responding to the story, whether they understand, comprehend the story or not. If they look confused, for example, it's an excellent feedback for you. So it gives you the idea that, oh, okay, this line was not very clear, so I need to maybe repeat it, maybe use another visual, or maybe paraphrase. And because you're not holding anything, your hands are free, your body is free, you can move freely, you can walk around freely. If necessary, you can jump. If necessary, you can shout, okay? Hide somewhere. And when you tell the story, you're not limited to the language that the book uses. You can use the language that your students are familiar with. Then what about those not so good points about storytelling? Well, first of all, you need to learn the story by heart because you don't have a book to cheat from. And while telling the story, you may make some language mistakes. Well, making some mistakes is okay, but this is a modeling lesson. So when you tell the story, you're modeling the language. You don't want to make a lot of mistakes. And when you want to retell the story, you may not be able to use the same exact lines that you used in the first telling. Because we are all human, we can't remember the exact lines. We may, of course, use different sentences to give the same message. So the message will remain the same, but the sentences may not be the same. So it loses its property of being repetitive. Now let's move on to story creating. Story creating is a great activity, but your students need to be at least at A2 or B1 level of proficiency. Because in order to create a story, they need to have some command of the target language. Otherwise, you will end up being a walking dictionary in the classroom, students calling you and saying, how can I say this? How am I going to write this? Do you want to really do that? That's very tiring and time consuming. Well, story creating is good because students have the chance to create their own characters, their own plot. Whole class story creating can be a bit difficult. So it is a better idea to have small groups working collaboratively and cooperatively to create their own stories. This is something good because students have a chance to learn social behavior, how to treat others, how to take responsibility, how to respond others, how to share work. So that is important. If you don't want to use precious classroom time to create stories and to walk around and correct all the language mistakes that you spot, you can assign it as a project work. Again, as a small group, they can work together to create their own story outside the classroom. They can even prepare their own visuals to accompany the story. Well, this is good because it increases their imagination, increases their creativity, their cooperative and collaborative working skills. Well, one warning that I'm going to give you is when students create their own stories, they may make some mistakes. And you may want to correct those mistakes. This correction may cause frustration. If you believe that your students are cognitively and socially mature enough to take criticism, to take correction, do so. Use story creating. Otherwise, you may end up in a negative attitude from the students' perspectives. Well, don't forget that we are not choosing a story to enjoy only. We aim to teach language. So there are certain characteristics that we need to look for when we are choosing a story. We can use both classical stories and modern stories. Classical stories such as Snow White and Seven Dwarfs, Cinderella, Rapunzel, Three Little Pigs, The Little Red Riding Hood, are all familiar to our students. Most probably they have read or been told these stories in their native language, so the context is familiar. They know the plot. They know what happens. So what they're doing is they are rereading or rehearing the same story, but this time in a different language. So they may not need much help from you. For example, the Little Red Riding Hood. In a children's world, Riding Hood is not something common. We don't usually teach it. But because it's a part of the context, because it's the main character and the title of the story, children will immediately understand what it refers to. Classical stories, unfortunately, are long and they are not repetitive. And my God, they have some wicked characters and some terrible events in them, right? For example, they have witches with all kinds of bad intentions. They have wicked stepmothers, stepsisters. There are people eating wolves, hunters that cut up wolves, too much violence and too much blood. These are kind of psychologically disturbing events. Do we really want them in the classroom? Whenever I want to use a classical story, what I do is I adapt them. I change some of the events. If they're too terrible, I remove them, or I try to make them politically correct. Modern stories are brand new, they're totally new, so the context is not familiar. However, they are short and they are highly repetitive. They are also psychologically and pedagogically appropriate for children because they are carefully screened by experts. Now, there are many stories available on the market or on children's websites on internet, so I don't think that you will have any difficulty in finding modern stories for children. Okay, what are the characteristics of good stories for young learners then, to be used in the classroom? Well, we want short stories. We don't want too detailed stories. The stories that we want to use should have a clear and simple storyline with a clearly defined theme. They should have a well-developed plot. They should have plenty of repetition of frequent patterns and contain repeated chunks of language. They should offer a chance to children to join in to make, for example, noises such as animal noises. I'm talking about onomatopoeic words here, or pleasing sounds and rhythm, some kind of opportunity to accompany the story. They should be action-oriented. We don't want long descriptive passages or paragraphs. And they should contain lovable and interesting characters. When, as a teacher, you want to choose a story, try to find one which will engage the children within the first few lines. You don't want to lose their interest. Furthermore, choose a story that you like, because it will show. Choose a story that you feel you can tell well, which suits you. And of course, the story should be appropriate for your students, psychologically, cognitively, emotionally, linguistically as well. Don't worry about the language used in the story too much, because remember, what we are doing is we are presenting language within context. And try to choose a story which children will enjoy, understand well enough to enjoy, and experience a rich language environment. Of course, you need to choose a story for your own purposes. It has to be related to whatever you want to teach, or whatever you have taught. Maybe you're using the story as a post-activity. Stories which allow miming, role-playing, dramatizing, or other fun activities are more preferable. And, of course, stories should be visually supported. So if you have a difficult story to find visuals for, you may want to reconsider whether you should use that story or not. That's all for this video. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for other videos. Take care. Bye.